Mid-Morning Money, brought to you by Bain O'Leary, Minnesota's retirement experts. Joined on a Monday morning, as we often are, by Minneapolis-based business analyst and advisor Dale Kurschner to talk about a lot of different things going on in business. Dale, good morning. I hope you had a pleasant week here.
I did. Great weekend. How about you, John?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Great.
Hey, let's talk about a couple of things. One is, I like the opening comment here. It's time to ask for a raise. If you're an employer, it's time to amp up your game because, how much of this was impacted by these latest unemployment numbers?
You know, the latest from Friday were great. We see that we have the lowest unemployment we've had since the early 2000s. So I think that that's a big deal. But, we've been also seeing things that you and I have talked about in previous weeks and months where it keeps getting tighter and tighter when it comes to finding good talent. And it also, we keep hearing more and more about how people now are switching jobs more than they have in the past. And some of the more recent stats, 3.3 million people voluntarily quit their jobs. I think it was in March was the most recent number. We have those numbers. That's high. That's about as high as we've seen in a long time. And so people are actually saying, basically, if I can't get more money, if I can't find career growth opportunities where I'm at, I need to move on because it's a great time to do it.
We saw those numbers on Friday reach down to 3.8%, as you point out, the lowest in a long time. That kind of fueled the stock market. Even today, it started off with a bit of a bang here, Dale. I'm curious to know, when do we get to what's considered, they do have a level that's called full employment, don't they? A number that's, even though it's still out there, it's considered almost full employment.
It seems to be the only way we'll know that is when we actually see inflation start to go up. And then they'll look back and say, aha, that was full employment that happened right before inflation started to go up. And, we have not seen inflation go up. Typically, they think unemployment rates that reach the levels that we've seen recently would indicate full employment, but we haven't seen wage growth and we haven't seen a lot of inflationary pressure. And so the other thing that everybody's waiting for this year, and as I looked at other numbers that came out last week and in recent months, it really does look like we're going to see wage growth finally start to happen. Even here in Minnesota, Twin Cities Business had a report last month that found 54% of 245 business leaders that were surveyed said they plan to increase wages starting this summer. So that may then finally lead to some inflationary pressures, and we may be kind of talking about this 5 months from now saying, May's numbers were full employment.
Wow, yeah. That is significant. And again, it's sadly the barometer is inflation starts to tick up. That's a hell of a way to gauge it, isn't it? It's like, well, it must be good because it's going up. But along with that, I read a story in the business section, Sunday Star Tribune. I don't know if you saw this one, but a company that moved their headquarters here. They're starting here, where they should be more of a Silicon Valley type company. I believe was it Kispus? I think was the name of the company.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And he started out by citing the fact that a lower cost of living and, as was pointed out by the author, put aside, and they take into account the taxes, which we know are higher here, but overall a lower cost of living here than, say, somewhere out there in San Jose, Silicon Valley, out in that area.
Definitely. And, we have some other things like really good education. We talk about how Minneapolis Public Schools has their challenges, but I think our 8th grade reading rate is like within the top 5 in the United States. We have some other things going on, too. So it's cost of living, it's quality of life. There are other factors like our airport and our congestion on the freeways. We all complain about congestion, but relatively speaking, when you want all the amenities that we have here, both in a metro area and statewide, our traffic isn't that bad. So there are a lot of factors like that.
Some legal news that's going to make business repercussions a reality here. That was the Supreme Court ruling or announcement this morning that they matched with the baker in the case of the same-sex marriage. This goes back to a Christian baker who did not want to be providing a cake for a same-sex marriage in Lakewood, Colorado. The ruling by a 7-2 vote is a victory. So obviously, even some of the more liberal justices sided with the baker in this particular case.
It kind of came down to basically First Amendment freedom of speech, and they kind of went and said, okay, we're going to talk just about this one case. They're trying to say this isn't precedent setting. I think it will be a little bit here and there. There are other cases where, like, florists have denied service to same-sex couples. That might be different because there it's a product, there it's an actual service, whereas in this case, they could say that this baker didn't want to write certain words on the wedding cake, and that the First Amendment protects you from being forced by government to say words or to say anything if you don't want to say anything in words. So that seems to be how this ruling came about.
Yeah, because it is kind of, I think it was mentioned that it was a fairly narrow ruling that affects, really, as you say, Dale, only this particular case. And there's, lots of other aspects to this. It would still remain very difficult for someone to deny a same-sex couple, renting ability or purchasing in a neighborhood or something. Yeah, something like that. So
yeah, the headlines are actually the Supreme Court ducked that issue.
Yeah.
But it's an important First Amendment case that I think they did a good job on.
So tell me a little bit about this flying to LAX and LaGuardia, how that might become a better experience, courtesy of Delta Investments.
I had no idea. I always figure the airports are doing this stuff, but Delta is spending $19 billion on improving airports. The biggest chunk of that is $3.6 billion going into really helping to reinvent LaGuardia. And I don't know if you've gotten stuck there in rain like I have, but that is long overdue. And LaGuardia's overall project's an $8 billion redevelopment. It's going to be the first new airport in the United States since Denver International in 1995. But Delta's paying about half of that. So when you fly in there in the future, it's going to be a much nicer experience. And then LAX, too. They're spending $1.9 billion at LAX. And if you've flown there or if listeners have flown there in recent months, you've seen already some of these improvements. But now the big improvement's going to occur in about the next 12 to 24 months at LAX.
Yeah, that will be something that will be considerable. In the way it goes at LAX, as I was reading here, Delta's plan is the region's second largest infrastructure project after the LA stadium at Hollywood Park that's going to eventually host the Chargers and the Rams. So this is absolutely huge. I suppose it benefits Delta to be doing this because it probably gets them a favorable position at some of these gates where there's always, or these airports where there's always a competition for gates.
It definitely does, and it also helps in overall quality of service for the airports. LAX has been known as not being the best to, park your car and then get through security. Part of what Delta's doing here is they're really saying that the new and improved Delta gates and terminals will allow you to go kind of from curbside to actually getting on your flight much faster. So we'll see if that happens.
Yeah. That's always the plan, right? As you say, we'll see if that happens. So, Medical Alley launching a global summit focused on healthcare. What is Medical Alley?
Medical Alley is a trade association here that we've had for, at least a couple of decades. And so you think about all the medical startups and larger players like Medtronic, they're all part of this group that has been out trying to help kind of figure out how do we deal with regulations and how do we get more investors here and how do we support the companies we have. And so they are actually doing this very large event. And it's going to be this fall, but it's a really cool idea of having a global summit focused on healthcare, retail, and technology, and how all those things are converging. A lot of us have been talking about that convergence around here for the last couple of years. Now we have these guys leading it, and Arianna Huffington, other leaders, and Andy Slavitt. Andy ran Ingenix, which was kind of the brain-gathering unit of United Health Group. They gained all the collective claims data across the country. He went on to fix things with the Affordable Health Care Act and then led Medicare and Medicaid under the Obama administration. Andy's going to be part of this as well. So, big deal. The governor's involved and all excited about it. And other people too. So I think it's in October, and watch for that because it's going to help put Minnesota on the map even further.
Okay, good. Yeah, and as you mentioned, a lot of high-profile companies here, like United Health and Allina, as well as the medical tech companies, Medtronic and St. Jude, Boston Scientific. I mean, all with large footprints in this area. So
yeah, and last week on your show, we talked about how United Health Group is converging all this information. They're working with other sources now, and there's just this combination of the provider side, the hospitals, the insurers, and then the med tech companies, and they're all kind of coming together in terms of how do they better serve people.
All right. Hey, one more story I want to touch on, and this could be some very good news for a lot of folks. A new Mayo-backed device for treating deadly type of stroke is nearing FDA notification. Now, what is the difference between FDA notification and FDA approval?
I think that it's just another step in the process here in terms of getting this out to people. And I think that what they're working on at the Mayo with this and this private venture is just a really cool idea to try to finally keep these deadly types of strokes from hitting a fairly large percentage of people out there.
Yeah, it looks like it's a very interesting story. That one you can find a link to, too, I believe, at Twin Cities Business Magazine. So
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So lots of good news here for business all around our area, Dale. And again, things, I don't know, they continue to hopefully, well, I hate to gooch it here by saying there's a lot of positive news happening.
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, there are other things going on even with China and what they're trying to import more for steel. News on that. They're looking for more high-quality ore pellets. That's good news for what's being produced in northern Minnesota. So, yeah, there's everywhere you look, you can find some good news for all of us here in Minnesota.
What are you hearing about the latest rumblings on tariffs, Canada and Mexico? Justin Trudeau, the prime minister in Canada, said he would match dollar for dollar that, any things that might be impacted. And Canada, a big trade partner for the U.S., as is Mexico, especially for including Minnesota-grown pork.
Yep, and there is a good example of how you can always find challenges in Minnesota, too. Yeah, it's the pork side. There are different numbers on the pork side. I mean, I've looked into that in the past, and when I look at overall pork production and how much of it is exported to certain countries, the Pork Producers Association makes it sound like quite a bit is being shipped to Canada and other places like Mexico and China. But other pork producers I talk with say it isn't that huge of an issue as much as soybeans are for some of our other farmers. The soy products and some of the things that are being produced in our fields, we're watching that as well in terms of what might happen. And then there are other things like steel. If steel prices go up, the products that our companies here make and ship to Canada and to Mexico, those will go up in cost, and then it's harder to compete. So tariffs, NAFTA, all the stuff that's going on with foreign trade has a lot of people nervous here in Minnesota.
Yeah, but again, we don't know what the reality is because some of these things have yet to be implemented, right?
Yeah, we're in the age of hype and a lot of positioning, and until
hype?
some of this stuff actually comes to fruition, you don't know.
Yeah, all right. Hey, Dale, thanks very much for the conversation. We'll get an update again come next Monday on a lot of business news as it affects where we live.
Sounds good, John. Have a great week.
Take care.
John, have a great week.
Take care.
John, have a great week.
Take care.
John, have a great week.